chest congestion. It hasn't gone away since, so I'm thankful that I was able to make it through that song. Went and consulted my local Baptist witch doctor and got the right essential oil for it, and trying to clear it up. But thankfully it held out. And so 1 Kings chapter number 19. I want to ask just one question tonight. How many of you have ever asked this question, maybe regarding a specific scenario, maybe something that happened in life, or maybe a scene that you came up on, and you asked the question, "Are you kidding me?" Kind of in wonder and amazement, shock. You may think, "Man, are you kidding me? I wonder how that happened," or "I wonder what that person was thinking." Maybe if you raise kids, you think that often. You think, "Man, are you kidding me? Why'd you even do that?" Okay, how many have asked the question, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah.
When we come to 1 Kings chapter number 19, I believe that we could see Elijah at a moment in his life that, as I read and think about the chapter previous and then the chapter that we enter here in 1 Kings chapter number 19, I can't help but ask the question of this: are you kidding me? In a way that you ask it is wonder why is Elijah in this point? Why is he facing this specific situation? And many times we face trials, we face heartaches, and sometimes scenarios and different things come into our life that we kind of wonder, okay, God, why is this happening? Why did this take place? Where do I turn from here? And sometimes, if we're not careful, sometimes we can find ourselves a lot of times in the shoes of Elijah and kind of begin to be discouraged and be bogged down by the things that take place in life, because obviously life is not a bed of roses. There are things that come in because we live in a sin-cursed world. We can't escape some things that take place, and so we can't help but many times face times of discouragement, face times of wondering of where do I go from here? What do I take? What steps do I take to make sure that I'm not discouraged, to make sure that I get through this moment in my life? And so I want us to look here at just for the next several moments tonight of some considerations from the life of Elijah. Let's start reading in 1 Kings chapter number 19. It says, "And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, withal how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. And when he saw that, he arose and went before his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. But he," that's Elijah himself, "went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. And as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, then an angel touched him, and said unto him, Arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baking on the coals, and a cruse of water at his head. And he did eat and drink, and laid him down again. The angel of the Lord came again to the second time, and touched him, and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. And he arose and did eat and drink, and went in the strength of the meat 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the mount of God. And he came thither," in verse number 9, "unto a cave, and lodged there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said unto him, What doest thou here, Elijah?" So the Lord asked Elijah this question, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" We see that he's got news that the wicked Queen Jezebel seeks to destroy his life because of what he did in chapter number 18, which we'll look at here in a moment. And so Elijah flees into the wilderness. He goes a day's journey into the wilderness and sits down under a juniper tree, and there an angel comes and feeds him, no doubt fed from the hand of God. Elijah was, even in the moment of his discouragement, even in the moment of this hard time, this trial that he was going through. And Elijah goes, and it says that he was fed there for 40 days and 40 nights on the food alone that he had received. And then verse number 19, God comes and asks Elijah, what do you do here? Why are you here? Why are you in this place? And so we see that Elijah responds to the Lord, and he says in verse number 10, he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant. thrown down thine altars and slain thy prophets with the sword. And I want you to take note of this phrase that I'm about to read here in this verse. It says, and I, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away. Are you kidding me? A little while ago, the month of May, when we did the tent crusade, the tent meeting in Indianapolis, that I'm sure that you remember me and Brother Jake mentioning when we were here back in April. And as kind of a custom, what we do is when we come into the area before the tent meeting every Sunday morning, and even Wednesday night, what we do is each evangelist goes into a different church in that area to kind of present the work, to kind of get the preachers on board. And we came to this church, and it was Lifeline Baptist Church in Canby, Indiana. And we began to go there and present the ministry. I wasn't necessarily preaching that day, but I was there solely to kind of present the ministry, present the tent meeting, and kind of help them to know how to better pray for the whole meeting. And so the pastor, we'd been there before, and so we knew him a little bit. And so he said, hey, this is the time that I'm going to invite you up and just kind of take about 5 to 10 minutes and just kind of present the ministry and just tell us a little bit about it. And so as I got up to the platform, and they had just these big lights here shining on, it just felt like I was in a sauna. It was just flaming hot. Usually platforms are hot enough, but then they had these lights, and so I got up there and I'm sweating bullets, and I'm getting ready to present the tent meeting. And off to my left on the pulpit was a cup of water. That whenever a preacher would come in, or for the pastor, whenever they were preaching, that this cup of water, obviously, much like this water bottle, if a preacher needs a drink, when his mouth gets dry or just needs a drink just in general, he'd be able to reach over and grab this water. And so I was beginning to wax eloquent and just begin to tell about the tent meeting. And before I knew it, something had fallen on the left side of the pulpit. And I look, and what had happened is, as I was talking, I just kind of kept my hands right here and kind of just began to talk and kind of use my hand motions, all that stuff. And I just kept kind of bringing them to the side as I would talk, as you kind of see I'm doing right now. And what I didn't realize is, one, that cup of water was so close. And what had happened is that cup that was sitting there, it had caught my finger, and I had knocked it over in the middle of the service, and it was live streamed, it was on video and everything, and I knock it over, and it falls all over the pulpit and all over the ground, and I just kind of sat there and thought, you've got to be kidding me. This did not just happen. After all, it's online. Once things are online, you can never get it back. So if anybody wants to look for that, the moment that was probably one of the embarrassing moments so far of ministering and coming into churches, is I knocked this cup of water all over their platform, all over the pulpit. And so as I was beginning to talk, I told the pastor, hey, I just knocked over your water. You may need to figure out how to clean that up. I'm sorry for it. And so he got a towel, and the assistant began to wipe it up. And I couldn't help but think, at that moment, are you kidding me? Did this just really happen? In front of all these people, I just knocked down all this water and just totally made a fool of myself. There are times that we think, and we come to situations in life, and maybe we've done it, or maybe it's something that we've come upon, maybe something on the news or something on social media, and you think, man, are you kidding me? Is this even true? Just before we came to the service, I began to kind of scroll through Facebook just a little bit, and I know I should have been praying and focusing on my message, but I was just being godly and looking at Facebook just real quick, and I began to watch this video, and it was these 3 kids that they had some kind of, not necessarily disease, but some kind of disorder, I guess you would call it, and that this is what it was called. It was the uncombable hair syndrome. And so these little kids, about 4 years old, are walking around, and their hair is just standing up. Kind of like when you take a balloon and you rub it on somebody's head and the static. But this was not just a few hairs that were sticking up. This was their whole head of hair. And I couldn't think, are you kidding me? Is that even a thing? I didn't even know that was possible. I knew it is if you rub a balloon on your head. But man, that's crazy. You know, we all face situations and times of wondering, are you kidding me? But you know, the truth is as life continues on, no matter how spiritual somebody is, the truth is that sometimes life will hit you hard. Sometimes discouragement will come. Maybe it's news that you got from a doctor. Maybe it was cancer. Maybe it was somebody, a loved one that had passed away. Many times it can be hard. Sometimes it can be discouraging. And no matter how strong you may be, no matter how strong you may be in the faith even, no matter what, sometimes it can take a toll on you. Sometimes you can't help but sit back and wonder, God, why? God, what is taking place? What do I do? Where do I go from here? How do I handle the discouragement? And I want us to look just real quick at 3 considerations when it comes to facing discouragement. When it comes to facing difficult times, what should we do? What should our considerations be? Notice first is the character of discouragement. Look back at 1 Kings chapter number 18, the character of discouragement. The truth is, when it comes to the character of discouragement, no matter who it is, it can happen to the best of us and it can happen to the worst of us. When difficult times come, when trials come, when discouragement comes, sometimes, no matter who it is, sometimes it can take a toll on us. And the fact is that discouragement will come in your life, whether it's financially, whether it's relationally, whatever it may be, discouragement comes. Hard times come. But the question is when that does come, where are we going to turn? What are we going to do in light of what has taken place? And so notice 1 Kings chapter number 18. We find a man by the name of Elijah. Elijah, we know, is a mighty prophet of God, and many of us look up to Elijah and we think, man, if there's somebody that I want to be like, it's Elijah. Somebody that was a prophet of God, somebody that was a man of God. We see in 1 Kings 17, we see that Elijah is fed by the widow. He's fed many times by the hand of God. In 1 Kings 18, we find a specific scenario that Elijah begins to go. For 3 years long, Israel had faced drought. And also on top of that, there was great famine that had taken place. Look at 1 Kings 18, verse number 1. We'll start reading there. It says, "And it came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go, show thyself unto Ahab, the wicked king, and I will send rain upon the earth." So Elijah had a message, and it was this, to go into Ahab and to tell Ahab, hey, it's going to rain. You know, for 3 years, for 3 long years, there's been a drought. There hasn't been any rain on this earth, on this land, and now it's going to rain. And so that was Elijah's message. So Elijah goes, in verse number 2, Elijah went to show himself unto Ahab. And we know that Ahab and Jezebel, the dynamic duo of wickedness, here they were trying to figure out, what do we do? How do we handle this drought? And on top of that, there's great famine. Verse number 3, Ahab and Obadiah. Obadiah was somebody that feared the Lord greatly. So you could say this: he was maybe a preacher, maybe somebody that proclaimed the news of God. And Ahab called Obadiah, which was the governor of his house. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, for it was so, when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50 in a cave and fed them with bread and water. And Ahab said unto Obadiah, Go into the land unto all fountains of water and unto all brooks, peradventure we may find grass to save the horses and mules alive, that we lose not all the beasts. So here Ahab was worried about this famine that had taken place, that there had been no water. There had now been this famine that had come. Obviously it would come with a drought. And so Ahab and Obadiah, they team up, and Obadiah, the prophet of God, what he does is, here he is, and Ahab says, okay, I'm going to go this way. Obadiah goes the other way, and they go out and search for some kind of water, some kind of land, some kind of grass that they could feed their animals, the mules and the cows and the cattle. Why? Because obviously, once they lose that, there's no getting them back. They didn't want to lose everything in this drought and in this famine. And so they went out and searched for these things. In verse number 7, we find Obadiah has a meeting with a man by the name of Elijah. Somebody that was familiar to him, somebody that he no doubt heard of many times. Maybe he heard the times that he was fed by the widow and different events that had taken place in his life. In verse number 7, and as Obadiah was in the way, behold, Elijah met him, and he knew him, and fell on his face and said, Art thou that my Lord Elijah? So he recognized him, and he answered in verse number 8, I am. Go, tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. So Elijah comes and he meets Obadiah, and he says, okay, Obadiah, I've come for one purpose, and it's this, to go and tell Ahab, King Ahab, that it's going to rain. And so Obadiah, as he begins to have this conversation with Elijah, and as Ahab, no doubt we understand that he's a very wicked man, ungodly, it doesn't care a thing about God. Obadiah kind of starts to fear for his life. He begins to shake in his boots, and he kind of responds to Elijah, and he says, Elijah, you see what he says, have I sinned that thou wouldst deliver the servant into the hand of Ahab to slay me? He said, hey, if I come back empty-handed, maybe it's because he didn't come back and he didn't find places that the cattle and the mules could stay. Maybe that's why he would slay him. Maybe just in fear of, hey, I've been talking to Elijah, the one that you despise, the one that you hate. And so Obadiah comes before Elijah and he says, Elijah, have I sinned? What have I done that you would send me before Ahab? That really, if I go before Ahab right now, what is he going to do? He's going to kill me. He's just going to cut my head off and it's going to be over for me. So he begins to kind of fear for his life and wonder, Elijah, do I really need to do this? And so we see that continues on. They continue to go back and forth, and Elijah tells him, hey, if you go before Ahab, I promise you that the Lord Ahab won't focus on you, he'll focus on me because I'm the one that Ahab wants to talk to. If he would have realized, as Elijah said, that, hey, you're going to be all right once you go before Ahab, he's not going to worry a thing about you, you're not going to lose your life, God's going to protect you, God's going to take care of you, and you can flee and you can be safe. And so, verse number 16, it says, so Obadiah went to meet Ahab. So, after kind of going back and forth, he finally said, okay, I'll go before Ahab. And just like Elijah promised, that Ahab wasn't worried about Obadiah, but he was worried about Elijah. And it says, Ahab went to meet Elijah. Now we find Ahab and Elijah. Here it is, verse number 17 through 20. We see that they begin to talk back and forth, and Ahab says this, art thou he that troubleth Israel? It says, hey, aren't you the guy that's been causing all sorts of trouble in this land, in Israel? Are you the guy that is the reason for this famine and this drought? Hey, you're the one. I just can't stand you because this is what's taking place in our land. And so Elijah responds right back and he says, hey, I'm not the one, but you're the one. You and your fathers, you've turned your back on God. You followed Baal. You're the one that's brought all of this problem and all this turmoil to the land in which you're the leader of. Could you imagine the preacher standing before a well-known leader, a very powerful leader, and pointing his bony finger, because we know all preachers have to have a bony finger and point it in the face of wrong. And so that's what he does. He points his finger and says, hey, Ahab, it's not me, but it's you. You're the reason for all of this. And so then Elijah tells Ahab, okay, you've turned your back on God. Now it's time to see what God is the one true God. So he says, call all your prophets of Baal to come down, and 450 of them. And so he says, call them down and we'll have a showdown on Mount Carmel. A very familiar passage, but I want us just to recount it in our minds just because it's going to lead into what I'm about to preach here just in a couple moments. So we see this man by the name of Elijah, and he comes, and there he confronts the prophets of Baal. Not only is he now confronted Ahab, but now he's about to confront the prophets of Baal. In verse number 21, and Elijah came unto all the people and said, how long halt you between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him. And so he's saying, hey, it's time to stop teetering back and forth who you're going to serve. Some of you come over here and you say, okay, I'm going to serve God, but then you go right back into to worshiping the prophets of Baal. Some of you begin to worship the prophets of Baal. Sometimes you kind of sit on the fence of who do I believe, who do I want to follow, which one? And so Elijah said, okay, enough is enough. It's time for you to choose. It's time for everybody in this land to choose. Hey, who are you going to serve? These false gods that have no answer and have no care over you, or the one true God that's the creator of all, the creator of this universe, the one that cares for every single one of us? He says, hey, how long halt you between two opinions? It's time to decide, who are you going to follow? Who are you going to follow? So he begins to ask this question, and it says a sad statement of what happened. And the people answered him not a word. Really, at this point, their lack of answer was an answer in and of itself. That they were not willing to identify with the one true God. They answered not a word. They decided, hey, I'm going to try and stay on the middle of the fence as long as I can. And so we see that Elijah calls them in the next several verses, and he says, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make an altar, and we're going to build it up, and we're going to decide who's going to be the one true God. And so there it is he says, okay, let's build this altar. So the first up is the prophets of Baal. So they go and they build this altar. They take the sacrifice and they place it on the altar. And so there it is, the sacrifice is there. And they begin to cry out to the prophets, the Baal. And they begin to cry out and cry out. And they throw themselves on the altar and hope and wishing that their God would respond by fire. Because the God that would respond by fire and consume the sacrifice, guess what? That was the one true God. And so the prophets of Baal are up and they begin to cry out and seek their false god. And Elijah kind of has a little fun, sits back and says, hey, maybe your God's a little busy. Maybe he's busy, he's got too much on his plate, maybe he can't hear you right now. Or, hey, maybe you're not calling out loud enough, so why don't you cry out a little louder? And so here, these prophets, they get so consumed and so hoping that their God would answer by fire. They begin to cut themselves, they begin to fall on the altar. And what were they wanting? They were wanting their prophet, their God, to answer by fire. But we see in the next several verses that nothing happens, and the prophets of Baal have no points on the board. And so, here it is. Now it's time for Elijah to stand up. It's time for Elijah to be on the call out to his one true God. And so, he places the sacrifice on the altar. And listen, in the middle of the drought, guess what he does? He calls all the prophets of Baal to gather buckets of water, to pour on the sacrifice, to pour on the whole altar. And what he does is he even digs a trench around the altar so that way the water would sit. And this is in the midst of a drought. Here it is when water's scarce, he says, okay, hey, I want you to pour all that water on this sacrifice. And so that's what they do. And there it is they pour it on. And Elijah, in verse number 36, he begins to call out to God. It says in verse number 37, hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that thou art the Lord God, and thou hast turned their heart back again. In verse number 38, then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed, not just burned up the sacrifice a little bit, but consumed the sacrifice, consumed the altar, and even got rid of all the water. What had happened? The prophets of Baal, zero, the one true God, answers by fire. And we see that Elijah calls fire down from heaven and God responds. In that day, we see that God won and God showed himself true and showed himself, hey, I'm the one true God. I'm the only God that can answer your prayers. And so Elijah continues to go down in verse number 40. And sometimes, Brother Dale, I wonder if we kind of pass by this just kind of a little bit. But to think of what Elijah is about to do in verse number 40, it says, then Elijah brought them down, that's the prophets of Baal, down to the brook Kishon and slew them there. Now, he didn't have some kind of strike team. He didn't have some kind of force that he would call and say, okay, I want you to get rid of them. But he said he slew the prophets of Baal. So one by one, here it is, Elijah is killing these prophets. And he gets rid of them. I wonder how maybe that could have played an effect in some way in what's about to happen in chapter number 19. And then it says that in verse number 41 through 46, we see that Elijah, the famous passage of Elijah saying that, hey, rain's coming, rain's on the horizon. And we see that when there was a drought, God not only answered by fire and showed himself that he's true, but also he sends rain. And then we come to chapter number 19, our passage, and we find the character here of Elijah. And we see what has taken place as Jezebel has said, hey, I know what you've done to the prophets of Baal. And I'm not happy. And so she says, pretty much in short, it says, hey, because of what you've done, I'm going to seek your life and I'm going to destroy you. And so we find Elijah kind of begins to fear for his life, as no doubt you and I would probably do the same. If you knew somebody was out for your life, you and I would probably run. How many would run? Okay, how many would you try and stay away from that person? You'd avoid him. Okay, that's kind of what Elijah is doing. And so we find here that Elijah runs and he goes into the wilderness. He sits down under the juniper tree. But not only does he just run in fear of his life, but he failed to understand that, hey, the God that just answered by fire is the God that can protect him. No matter how wicked somebody is, no matter what they say, God is the one that can protect him. And so he goes and he flees and he sits down and begins to kind of have, you could say, a pity party. He's despondent. He's in the pits of despair, wondering, Is there anything left for me? And we find in the passage, he says to God in verse number 10, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And in chapter number 18, we see that Elijah says that same thing, but he says it in a different way. Look at verse number 22, when he's asking, hey, how long halt you between two opinions? And he says it kind of confidently, even I only am left. I'm here to challenge the prophets of Baal. But now in chapter number 19, it takes on a whole different meaning. As he sits there under the juniper tree and he begins to say, hey, I'm the only one left serving God. He begins to kind of have this pity party, and no doubt he had a little bit of a right to do it, I guess you could say, because he's fearing for his life. But he sits down, and in the time of trouble, despair, wondering, where do I go? Where do I turn? What do I do? You can't help but ask the question, are you kidding me? Elijah is in dire fear of his life. And now he's discouraged. But you know what that tells me from this passage? Is that discouragement, when troubling times come, no matter who we are, if we're not careful, we can let it have the victory over us. We can sit back and wonder, God, why? God, where do I go in this moment? God, what do I do? And we begin to kind of sit back and wonder, God, where do I go? But the truth is that we notice the character of discouragement is this, is anybody can face this thing of discouragement. Anybody can face, in the midst of trials, can begin to kind of wonder, God, where do I turn? We kind of wonder, okay, what do I do in this moment? We begin to get down and maybe our trials and discouraged. And it happened to Elijah. So we see the character of discouragement. It can happen to any of us. Notice next is the event of discouragement. The event of discouragement. Will you say it with me? Ready? The event of discouragement. Ready? One more time. The event of discouragement. So look back at our passage. So Elijah in verse number 4, he flees for his life and sits down under a juniper tree. And thankfully, we see that Elijah is fed by the hand of God through an angel of the Lord, and he's taken care of by God. Even in, you know what that tells me? Even in the midst of discouragement, even in the midst of your trial, even in the midst of your troubling situation, that God is always there. He's never going to give up on you. He's never going to leave you or forsake you, as the Word of God says. He's always right there, and rest in that fact and know that, hey, no matter what comes your way, God is right there. And He's never going to change. He's always there to pick you up. Because why? Because Jesus Christ cares for you. He saved you. He's given you a home in heaven. And you're His child. And how foolish would it be for a parent to have a child and kind of neglect and kind of say, okay, you're having a troubled time, kind of just get through it. No, that's not what you're going to do as a mom or dad. You're going to be there. And that's the same thing with our God in heaven. Is that He's there. He cares for us in the moment of our discouragement. And so we see in verse number 10, he says that at the end, I only am left. And so the event is this, is that somebody's seeking his life. He goes and he hides under this juniper tree and he flees into a cave in verse number 9. And then verse number 11, we see, it says, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains and break in pieces the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire, a still small voice. So we see the event of discouragement is this, is that here, Jezebel is seeking his life and he begins to become discouraged. And the truth is I don't know what you're going through, or I don't know what you're about to go through. But listen, sometimes discouragement can come. Sometimes things can take place, whether it's financial struggles, whether it's somebody that has just passed away, whether it's somebody that you're praying for, that they would get saved, whatever it may be. Sometimes discouragement can come, and sometimes it can weigh heavy on us. We can miss somebody. We can wonder, okay, is this person ever going to turn back to God? Is this prodigal ever going to return to the Lord? And we begin to get discouraged. We begin to think about all the different things that could happen or that might happen. But you know what? Oftentimes discouragement comes because of the simple fact is we get our focus not on God, but it starts to turn onto our circumstances. It's true. It can happen. So what happens? Discouragement often comes, I know for it's true in my life, is when I begin to worry about finances, when I begin to worry about different events that are taking place, and begin to wonder, okay, God, where are you at in this? Where's your answer? Where's your answer to this prayer? What happens? I begin to get my eyes off of God and begin to get it on my circumstances, and mark it down every time you do that. Every time your focus shifts to your circumstances, every time your focus shifts to whatever's going on, discouragement comes. Difficulty comes and you begin to try and wonder, how am I going to get through this? And it can happen to the best of us. No matter how spiritual a person is, discouragement can happen, and to be honest, it will happen. Preachers often, we get discouraged. Christians get discouraged just by the weight of life. But the question is what are you going to do with your discouragement? It's come, that troubling event has come, that discouraging time has come, but you have the choice, you and I have the choice, whether we're going to see the event that's taken place, whatever it may be, whatever the event of discouragement that's brought discouragement into our life, whatever it may be, you and I have the choice whether we're going to keep our eyes fixed on the Lord Jesus Christ or we're going to focus on our situation. And so you and I have the choice, but notice, not only do we have this choice, not only do I see the surreal event of discouragement, the event of discouragement, but notice last is the sudden truth. The sudden truth. The truth of discouragement. The truth is this, is that Elijah, as he's at his lowest point in his life, as he's at the lowest moment in his ministry, as he's wondering, listen, this is the guy that just the chapter previous called down fire from heaven. He slew the prophets. He saw the rain coming and he said, hey, God's going to send rain and I know that. And here we would look at Elijah and we would see, wow, what a guy is he. What a spiritual stronghold. What a man of God that here he is. He's calling down fire from heaven. I don't know about you, but I haven't called down fire from heaven lately. Miss Mary, have you? I haven't done it. We wish we could. It would be interesting to see that take place and wonder, okay, what did it really look like? Have you ever wondered that? What did it look like that the fire fell from heaven? But here it is. Here's a great man of God, and he calls down fire from heaven. And then the chapter next to that chapter of where we see that he says, hey, God answered by fire, we see in the next chapter he's down and discouraged. He's in that pit of despair. He's very despondent, wondering, hey, where do I go from here? But you see, the truth of discouragement is this, is that when discouragement comes, we have the choice whether we're going to keep our eyes on Jesus or on our situation. And if our eyes, or if your eyes have been on the situation, what's been taking place, I challenge you, as hard as it may be, turn your eyes and your focus back on the Lord Jesus Christ, because God doesn't want you to be discouraged. He wants you to understand that He's right there every step of the way. He's right there holding on to you. And He wants to help you. But you see, the truth of discouragement is this. The sudden truth is that as the earthquake comes, God's not in it, as He's in this cave. As the mighty wind comes, it comes, but God's not in it. The fire comes and God's not in it. But we see at the end of verse number 12, it says, after the fire, a still small voice. Here, Elijah, the great prophet of God, flees and he runs into a cave and he's discouraged. He's down after all the events that have just taken place, and he's down and he's wondering, okay, I only am left. And he says it twice here in this chapter. He says, hey, God, I'm the only one left. I'm the only one left serving you. There's nobody else in Israel that wants to turn to you. They've all turned to these false gods. There's nobody here. I'm the only one serving you. And so what happens is he sits in this cave. God comes to him, not in this loud, bombastic way, but He comes to him in a still small voice. This evening, I believe God, every time we're discouraged, every time something takes place, a trial, God's always going to come to us in a still small voice and say, hey, I know what you're going through. I'm trying to help you grow as a Christian. I'm trying to get you closer to me through maybe a trial or maybe through something that's taken place, and maybe discouragement comes and God begins to use it. What is He going to do? He comes to you and He says, hey, child of God, I'm right there with you. I haven't left you. I believe this still small voice was God's way to show Elijah, I have not left you. I'm right here all along. I'm not going to leave you. And He comes to him in a still small voice. But you know what? If Elijah wasn't alone in this cave, I wonder if he would have heard that still small voice. As he was away wondering, God, what do I do? God comes to him and says, hey, I'm right here. I've come to you in a still small voice, and maybe you're discouraged. Maybe you're down. You're wondering, okay, where do I go from here? What do I do? What do I do in the face of my trial? As you spend time with the Lord, guess what He does? He comes to you and begins to speak in that still small voice within you and says, hey, I'm right here. We see that Jesus is full of care and compassion on us. We see that He never leaves us nor forsakes us. And the Bible says this about our God, the one that we serve, the one that we have as our Savior. It says in Hebrews 13:8, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, forever. Get this, He's never going to change. He's always going to be right there. We see that weeping may endure for a night in Psalms 30 verse 5, but joy is going to come in the morning. Guess what? God's right there. Yes, it may be hard. Yes, you may be going through a difficult situation, or you may go through one here shortly. Whatever it may be, wherever you're at, joy is going to come in the morning. There may be weeping. There may be times of discouragement. There may be hard times, but understand that every good gift, every perfect gift cometh from God, because He is the Father that loves us and He cares for us, and He's always there right beside us. He's never going to faint. He's never going to wonder, I forgot about Brother Al. Maybe I need to just kind of maybe check in on it. He's not that God, because He's the same yesterday and today and forever. And get this, He's always there for every one of us, because He cares for us. The truth is not only does He come to a still small voice and He cares for us, but notice in our passage, and then we'll be done real quick. As he sits there and Elijah says, even I only am left, and the Lord doesn't skip a beat. He says, Elijah, go. He doesn't necessarily kind of coddle him. He says, okay, Elijah, I know you're down. I know that you're fearing for your life, but I'm right here. But hey, it's time to go. It's time to go back to what I have called you to do and to serve me. And look at verse number 18. It says, God speaking to Elijah says, yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. So what God saying is, hey, Elijah, you think that you're the only one, but understand, there are 7,000 back in Israel that have not bowed the knee to Baal. You're not the only one. Get up, keep going. There's people that I have set aside, set apart, that have not bowed the knee, that have said, hey, I see what Elijah stands for, and I'm going to stand for the one true God. I'm going to follow Him. 7,000. And you know what? I bet if Elijah saw that and knew that there were 7,000 that have not bowed the knee to Baal, I believe chapter number 19 would not have been in this book. But you see, God used others to encourage them to say, hey, you're not the only one. You're not the only one serving God. And I kind of come with the same plea, and to understand this is that you're not the only one going through something. You're not the only one that's facing discouragement. There's others that face it as well. But that's why God has brought us together as a church, is to help us to understand, hey, we can be here for one another, and we can help each other through our times of discouragement, through our times of trials. God is there ultimately. But I wonder, are you there for others that are going through discouraging times, through hard times? There are 7,000 that have not bowed the knee to Baal. Hey, there's people out there that are praying for you, that are rooting for you, that are on your side and willing and ready to help you. But notice, just last, I can't help but do it. You guys all right? You guys good?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Good. Look at verse number 19. We see that Elijah departs and he goes thence and found Elisha. Remember, Elisha is going to be the guy that follows Elijah in ministry. And so Elijah passes by Elisha in verse number 20. Cast his mantle at the end of verse number 19 towards Elisha. I don't know right now. I haven't kind of quite understood why he cast his mantle. I'm still trying to figure out why he would have thrown his coat towards Elisha. I don't know. Maybe it's to say, hey, I'm passing the torch, or maybe I'm giving up. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. If you want to know, ask Pastor, okay? And so here it is. He casts his mantle. Verse number 20, Elisha runs to Elijah, and it says, let me, I pray thee, kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow thee. And he said unto him, go back again, for what have I done to thee? So Elisha says, hey, Elijah, hey, I want to learn ministry unto you. I want to be a prophet just like you. I believe God's called me. And so he goes and says, hey, I want to follow you. Let me go back and tell my mom and my dad that, hey, I'm going to follow this great man of God by the name of Elijah. And Elijah kind of sits back and he kind of wonders, Brother Al, as he kind of says, why? What have I done to you? Why on earth would you want to follow me? And so we see in verse number 21, Elisha does just that. He returns back again and goes and kills the oxen. He goes and he makes this feast for his family and says, hey, I'm out of here. I'm going to follow the call of God in my life. I'm going to go be a prophet and study under the man of Elijah. And it says in verse number 21, I want you to look at this, and then I promise we'll be done. It says, then he arose and went after Elijah and ministered unto him. Now let me ask you, at the end of that passage, who was ministering to who? Just go ahead and look at verse number 21. Who is ministering to who? Elisha leaves and he says, okay, family, I'm going to go and follow Elijah. And he goes and meets up with Elijah. And who do you think, when it says he ministered unto him, who is ministering to who? Was Elijah ministering to Elisha, or was Elisha ministering to Elijah? Who do you think? Elisha was ministering to Elijah. Here it is in this great chapter that you look at Elijah's life and you can't help but ask, are you kidding me? This is Elijah. He's discouraged. He's down. But you know what's interesting is that there was somebody that came along Elijah to say, hey, I'm going to minister to you. I'm going to help you along this way. I don't know how he ministered to him, but we see that he did minister to him. And so what happens? Elijah, from this point on, he gets out of his discouragement. We see that once again, God uses him in a great way. And you look at 1 Kings chapter number 1, what happens? Elijah calls fire down from heaven one more time. What had happened? He had handled his discouragement the right way. He finally got his focus off on his circumstances. And as Elisha began to minister to him, he began to get his focus on God. And he saw the great God in which he had. And so what do we see? We see that he's encouraged. And he continues on and trains Elisha to be the next prophet. And it all boiled down to Elisha ministering to him. But I want to ask you, who can you minister to today? That's maybe discouraged, maybe down, maybe facing a trial. Who is it? Who is it that maybe you kind of know that they're going through something, but maybe you just need to call them and say, hey, I'm praying for you. Maybe just take them aside and say, hey, let's pray. I want to be there. If there's anything I can do, let me do it. Or maybe you just bake a cake or something, or bake some food for them and bring it to them and say, hey, I know you're going through a hard time, but I just wanted to do this for you. Whatever it may be, hey, let us as God's children be encouragers and not discouragers. As people are facing discouragement, would you and I be like Elisha and encourage others, one another? And it's no telling what God can do when we take our focus off our circumstances and turn to the mighty God that we have. And when we focus our response to God and our eyes on God, what happens? You see God for who He is, and your discouragement and your troubles and your trials begin to fall away. And so I want to ask you, are you 1 Kings 18 Elijah? Or maybe right now you're 1 Kings 19 Elijah. You're struggling. You're wondering, to be honest, I just don't know what to do. I have no idea what direction to go. I don't know how to get in this trial. I don't even know how to respond. And you're struggling and you're wondering, okay, how do I get out of discouragement? You do it by getting your eyes back on the Lord Jesus Christ. Understanding that there's people around you that want to encourage you, want to be there for you. And there are. And maybe some of you say, you know what, I'm not facing discouragement. That's not where I'm at right now. But maybe you can be an encourager like Elisha was and minister to others. By God's help, as you look at life, sometimes you can't help but wonder, are you kidding me? What is taking place? What's going on? But by God's help, would we keep our eyes fixed on Him to help us through our times of difficulty? Every head bowed and eyes closed. Nobody looking around.